And one. I think we are now live on Facebook. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's session. I'm Ishan Sharma, founder of Carvan, the Heritage Exploration Initiative. And today I'm really excited to host one of the icons of culinary history, Dr. Colleen Taylor Sen. And today's topic is India's contribution to the world's cuisine. From the time of Harappan civilization, India has been the center of a vast network of land and sea routes that were a conduit for plants, ingredients, dishes, and cooking techniques. Traders and missionaries took Indian spices, plants, and dishes to the Mediterranean, North Europe, Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, and China, together with one of India's greatest contributions, vegetarianism. Starting in the mid 19th century, nearly 2 million Indians went to the British colonies, dispersing their foodways and creating vibrant new dishes and cuisines. The trend continues today in Indian restaurants across the world, ranging from storefront dhabas to Balti curry houses and Michelin-starred temples of cuisine. And to talk about today's topic, we have with us, as I said, Dr. Colleen Taylor Sen. She was born in Toronto, Canada. Professor Dr. Sen is a Chicago-based author and culinary historian focusing on the food of the Indian subcontinent. He has contributed articles to Food Art, Travel and Leisure, the Chicago Tribune, and other publications. He is the author of 7 books, including Curry, A Global History, one of my favorite reads. Do check it out on Amazon. Turmeric, The Wonder Spice, a guide to Indian restaurant menus, and street food around the world, and encyclopedia. Do check that out as well. And she's the co-editor of the Chicago Food Encyclopedia. Her book Feast and Fast: A History of Food in India was selected as one of the best food books of the year by Vogue and the Smithsonian magazine. Dr. Sen is currently writing a book on Emperor Ashok and the modern dynasty and co-editing the Indian Food Companion. He has an honors BA and MA from the University of Toronto and a PhD from Columbia University. So without further ado, I would request and I would invite Dr. Sen to deliver today's Car 1 special lecture. And Dr. Sen, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to deliver this lecture. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you, Eshan, for inviting me to give this talk. This is such an impressive effort, a program you've put together, and the list of speakers is really impressive. And I only hope that I can live up to their high standards. So good morning from a cold and snowy Chicago, and I suppose it's a little bit chilly in Delhi too. But I'm very happy to do this. So I'm going to start with what everyone knows. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope. He reached Calicut on the Malabar coast. The Portuguese soon extended their empire all over the world, Western Hemisphere, Africa. And when Portugal and Spain united in 1600, their far-flung trading posts became the hubs of a global exchange of fruits, vegetables, and so on between the throughout the entire world. Now, this particular phenomenon is known to food historians as the Columbian Exchange after Christopher Columbus. And this shows you some of the, following his voyage, some of the trade routes. It's not a very good slide, but I think it'll be put up and I can always send it to you. But what has happened is, especially when it comes to India, the focus has been on what what dishes have been imported into India, the potato, the tomato, the chili pepper especially, and not so much on what has gone the other way, on what India itself has contributed to the rest of the world. And my argument is that really, if you look over the whole history of India that India may have well been the most influential force in the cuisine of the world. Now, from ancient times, India has been part of a global economy, the center of a vast network of land and sea routes that were a conduit for the exchange of goods and various ingredients. So let's start by looking at India's first great civilization, the Indus Valley Harappan Civilization. At its peak between 2600 and 1900 BCE. It extended over 1 million square kilometers over what are today Pakistan, India, parts of Afghanistan. And as more and more work is done, it's found that this empire is even vaster than one thought. And they've discovered ruins of a city just 70 miles from Delhi at Farmana in Haryana. And today, much of the land is desert, but in ancient times, it was fertile, it was forest, there was a lot of agriculture. And this agricultural surplus enabled the creation of cities, the developments of arts and crafts, and a quite sophisticated cuisine which really has surpassed that of many other civilizations. But this was, I think, basically a commercial society. It had a lot, I think, traders, Indian traders, which I'll show here. This shows you the Indus Valley trade routes. You can see that the traders were all over the ancient world. They were there's been traces found in Oman. They went north to Afghanistan, and they even reached as far as Egypt. And what they traded especially beads, lapis lazuli, and especially spices. And the spices that were indigenous to India included cardamoms, black peppers, and turmeric. And so they found cardamoms in Babylonia, Assyria, as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. And the Greeks later also valued cardamom very highly as a medicine. And there's been signs of a very ancient pepper trade to Egypt, including peppercorns that were stuffed into the nostrils of Ramses the Great in the 2nd millennium BCE when he was mummified. So this spice trade is something that has gone on for a very long time. Now, the next slide, we need to figure out what plants were actually indigenous to the Indian subcontinent. And this is a list of plants that were found at Farman, which was an Indus Valley city in Haryana. And it gives you, and archaeologists have discovered this by analyzing the residue in cooking pots and human and bovine teeth. And this helps them identify the plant species. So this gives you an idea also what the Indus Valley people ate. They had wheat, barley, rice, 2 kinds of millet, sorghum, mung dal, horse gram, and also eggplant, also known as brinjal, mango, ginger, turmeric, sedge it's not sage, it's a kind of a grass, garlic, and sesame, and perhaps bananas. So these are things that were actually, we know existed thousands of years BCE. So now I'd like to go over some of these foods and just show that how the words for these, names for these food actually entered other languages. And I think the most important is eggplant, which is also called brinjal, aubergine. And it's one of the most ancient, and I think it's probably the most typical Indian vegetable of all, because it's eaten pretty much all over. It's very versatile. And there are many words for eggplant in Sanskrit, one of which Vartaka, and Sanskrit scholars, please forgive me, which the late historian A.K.T. Chaya may be of pre-Aryan origin. Another Sanskrit word, Vatagan, became Badajan in Hindi. It entered Persian, it entered language, it entered Arabic, Spanish, and then today in French, the word aubergine. All these words come from the original Sanskrit. The eggplant in the U.S., what we call it in the U.S., it probably came from these little small white eggplants, that aubergines that look like eggs. So that's kind of an anomaly. It reached Persia in ancient times, and then in the 7th and 8th century, the Arabs took it to Mediterranean, to Europe, the Spaniards took it to the New World, and now it's grown everywhere in the world, including in my garden in Chicago in the summer. Another fruit that's indigenous to India is the mango, and the word for in Sanskrit is amra. It's theorized that it came from a Dravidian word mangai. And this actually originated in northeastern India. and it was bred selectively to remove the fiber and improve the fiber. And today there are thousands of varieties of mangoes, and every region of India has its own. Indians are very proud of their own local mangoes, and I think it is rightly called the king of fruit. Now today mangoes are grown all over the world, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Africa, and even in Florida, although there's no comparison with these mangoes with Indian mangoes, I have to say. And another fruit that was exported worldwide is the jackfruit, which came from the Malayan word chakka. Now, rice is an interesting story because the prevailing theory used to be that rice originated in China or in the Yunnan Plateau and reached India from here. But more recent research indicates that rice was domesticated independently in India, specifically the long grain variety that Indians love, which is known as Oryza indica. In 328, Alexander the Great came to India. Really, he only was in the area that today is Pakistan. When he went back, one consequence of his visits was that rice entered the classical European world, and it entered Greece. And like spices, it was originally considered a medicine. It wasn't really considered a fruit. The word rice, English word rice, French riz, etc., come from the Greek oryza, and that in turn comes from the Tamil orisi, which originally meant a berry. From Greece and Sicily, rice spread gradually through Southern Europe, and then eventually Europeans introduced rice to the New World. And here it became the basis, one of the main reasons for the slave trade, because it was such backbreaking word to harvest the rice that people were brought both for rice and for, actually I should say mainly for sugar, but rice secondarily. And another creation of, another loan of India was the chicken. The chicken was actually first domesticated in India, and I think remains have been found in the Indus Valley. And this reached Greece in the early, probably even before Alexander the Great, via the Persian Empire. Another word is the Sanskrit pipali, which gave rise to all the various words for pepper. Now, looking to another, still staying in the ancient world, the discovery that the monsoons were actually seasonal, which took place, I think, around the 1st century CE, led to a great growth of trade with Rome, because ships could now go back and forth between Rome and across here, and then overland across Africa, then across the Mediterranean to Rome. And turmeric and black and long pepper were well known to the Romans as well as the Greeks and Egyptians. And the use of pepper expanded rapidly in the Roman Empire. And in what's considered the world's first cookbook called Apicius, in the 1st century CE, 3/4 of the recipes call for the use of pepper. But this was a real luxury. It wasn't something that the average person could buy. It was extremely expensive because of the long journey. And the Romans paid for this pepper in gold and silver coins. And of course, hoards of gold coins have been found on India's west coast. And this really was a great expense. And the historian Pliny blamed the Romans' taste for expensive spices as one of the causes of the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, another really important, I'd say, invention in India is the processing of sugar. In 326 BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus, who had visited India as part of Alexander the Great's retinue, he described stones the color of frankincense, sweeter than figs or honey. And he was referring to crystallized sugar called khand, which is the origin of the English word candy. Sugar cane, whether it's indigenous to India or not, is a little bit uncertain, but certainly it was grown in India from very ancient times. And it was Indians who actually developed the technology to convert the juice extracted from the cane, because before then people just broke the juice and sucked it out, to various products. And this is a picture of an old sugar press that's still actually in use today. And so the cane that was extracted was made many products. These included jaggery or gur, kand, and solids that were called sarkara in Sanskrit. And this is the origin of the word for sugar in all the Indo-European languages. And I think I showed that in my previous slide, that yes, Sanskrit sugar. So this is another proof in a way that this is something that came from India. Now, some form of sugar was exported in small quantities to Greece, but like rice, it was used mainly as a medicine. By the 6th century CE, sugar cultivation and processing had reached Persia, and from there, the knowledge of processing came to the Mediterranean via the Arabs. Sugarcane was grown in southern Europe starting in the 9th century, and eventually was exported to the Caribbean and South and North America. And this was the main factor in the development of the slave trade, the need to harvest the sugar. Now, as I said, this is a very quick run through. So now I'm going to turn to the other direction and look at how India affected food to the east of it. And from ancient times, Southeast Asian held a very key position in the trade routes between India and China via Southeast Asian. Merchants from Kalinga, modern Orissa, brought not only spices and textiles, but also Hinduism, Buddhism, and to what are now Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia. And you had these Hinduized kingdoms actually lasted well into the 18th century, and the last remnant, of course, is Bali. Hindu colonists carried pepper to Java around 100 BCE. From here, it may have reached China. And in the opposite direction, cloves actually came to India from Indonesia, what's now Indonesia, at an early time. And you can see the Indian influence today, especially in Thailand. And I think Thai food is extremely popular in India. And I think that you can certainly see many similarities, but you see it especially in two kinds of curries. And one is called yellow, Thais use these curry pastes that are made from, you can buy them ready-made, or people often make them in their own house using a mortar and pestle. And it's something called a yellow curry paste that's used in fish and seafood. And it contains turmeric, which you don't find in other Thai cuisine, ready-made curry powder, and roasted coriander and cumin seed. And the other kind of curry that reflects the Indian influence is Mussam and Curry, which probably comes the word from Muslim. And this is a thick stew-like curry made with lamb or beef. And it originated near the Malaysian border. And this paste contains dried red chilies, ground coriander, cumin and cloves, and spices and whole spices. And you can see a whole anise here. And usually you don't find whole spices in Thai cuisine. So this is a very interesting dish. Now, I have to go to, I think, the country where Indian food has had an extremely big influence, as everybody probably knows, which is Britain. And in the late 18th century, really, employees of the East India Company, who had exploited India and made great fortunes, returned back to the mother country. They were called Nawabs or Nababs because of the great fortunes they had made. But they came and they missed the food that they had had in India. So a kind of an industry, and some of them brought their cooks with them. Interesting, actually, I gave a talk the other day on the history of Indian food in the US. Some of these people actually went to North America, some of these rich Nawabs, and the first Indians, South Asians in North America, were just 10 years after the founding of the Jamestown colony. So they were really early settlers of the North American continent, which is something which is really not a known fact. So, so companies rose to build curry powder and to give ready-made curry powders, ready-made pickles, and things like that, so that if they didn't have cooks, they could prepare these dishes on their own. And the very first Indian restaurant in England, curry had been served in coffee houses, I should add, but the first restaurant was this restaurant founded by this interesting guy named gosh, my note, I can't read my notes now. I don't have his, by Sake Din Muhammad. He was a soldier and he married an Irish woman. And he opened this restaurant called the Hindustani Coffee House. And there's a plaque today, it's in Mayfair, the site of where this restaurant was. It didn't last very long. It only lasted a few years. But what happened was curry gradually filtered down into all classes of society in Britain. Starting in about 1780, Hannah Glass, the famous cookbook writer, had a recipe for curry in her book, and all the books had it. And even Queen Victoria, who never visited India, was a great lover of India, and she had Indian servants. And every day there would be curry prepared at Windsor Palace. She said, just in case one of her subjects happened to come by. So this probably also made it more popular among other classes. Now, after World War II, well, there were always Indians in Britain who kind of jumped ship. That's kind of well known, especially these Lascars, many of whom came from Sylhet in what is now Bangladesh. And after World War II, when immigration opened up, many of these Bangladeshis came to England. And opening a restaurant is a good thing it's an easy thing for an immigrant to do. It just takes some capital, it takes a lot of hard work. You know, your whole family is in the kitchen all the time. So, so they opened these restaurants. Unfortunately, they didn't serve their own food. They served this kind of generic curry that had become kind of standard. And there were these curry houses they're almost dying out now, but they had red plush wallpaper, and they served these different curries, usually using ready-made powders, ready-made sauces. Later, tandoori restaurants opened based on Delhi's famous Moti Mahal. And the next sensation was the so-called Balti cuisine, which originated in Birmingham, and is really, I think, kind of like a karai, a bunch of meat and tomatoes and vegetables prepared in kind of a wok-like dish, which is a karai. There's many different origins, explanations of the origins of the name. I think it probably comes from Balti, meaning a bucket, but that's just one theory. And then, of course, the other dish that's very famous is chicken tikka masala. And the former, in 2001, the Foreign Secretary called it a true British national dish, not only because it is the most popular, because it is a perfect illustration of the way Britain absorbs and adapts external influences. Well, now, unfortunately, the Indian restaurant, the curry house business, is facing a crisis because the second and third generation of South Asians, they've got educated, they want to become doctors and lawyers, they don't want to go in the restaurant business. So it's estimated a third to the half of many of these little restaurants are going to close down. But you do have another category of Indian restaurants, especially in London, and these are these very high-end Michelin-starred restaurants like Tamarind, Benares. You can easily spend £150 for a meal, and they do very well. And I think for a couple of reasons, I think, well, they're located in very nice areas. Some are near the city where people have a lot of money, and I think Britain there's a certain nostalgia for well, I think it's very apparent now that for the Raj, when the days was, British kind of for the old time, and people also know Indian food, and people understand Indian food. So I think there's been a real market for these really nice restaurants. So Ishan, when you go to London, I hope you can try some of these. They're really really good. Another important, very great influence on British cuisine was tea. And in the 17th century, all the tea was imported from China by the East India Company. And it was very expensive. And they really wanted to break the monopoly that the Chinese had. So in the 1820s, a Scottish major, Robert Bruce, discovered tea bushes growing wild in northeastern India, where it had been always used as a fermented pickle and as a drink. And I visited that part of India last year, and I visited the local Shingpo people who had this, and they actually roast the tea in bamboo in bamboo tubes. And I took a couple of these back with me. It had a very interesting flavor. So because he saw tea growing there, he said, well, this is a place where we could grow tea in India. They had to smuggle tea plants out, and there was quite an adventurous story. They managed to learn Chinese planting and cultivating tea leaves. So the government launched a tea industry first in Assam, and then in Darjeeling, then the Nilgiri Hills, and later it went to Sri Lanka. And the price in UK, of course, dropped dramatically now that they could get tea from India. And by the end of the 19th century, actually 18th century, black tea, and that's something that's processed from green tea to make it last longer, had become a mass drink in Britain, and also in Australia, New Zealand, and even to some degree in Canada. My family's British, and I'm basically a tea drinker, so I think this comes on. Another popular beverage invented in India is gin and tonic. When tonic water was invented in the 1860s, it was marketed as an anti-malarial remedy because of its quinine content. So what happened in Indian clubs, they got in the habit of mixing it with gin, and this led to the birth of the famous G&T. And gin mixed with lime juice was also the basis of the gimlet cocktail. And some people claim the gimlet also was invented in India. I don't know if this is true, but I've had some very nice gimlets in India, so there might be some kind of a tradition there of this great drink. Now, I'm going to just turn to another topic, which is vegetarianism, and which I know is kind of a controversial topic in India, but I think it had a very great impact on the world's foodways. In ancient times, there were always many contacts between Greece and India. Even before Alexander's invasion, the 6th century BCE, there were Indian soldiers actually serving in the Persian army. So there was always a lot of contact between Persia, and then, of course, Persia and Greece were involved, and so on. And the Greeks who visited India were very impressed by the intelligence and the good health of what they called the gymnosophists. And these were Jains and other ascetics. In Greece, there was a vegetarian tradition founded by Pythagoras, and Pythagoras lived around the same time as Mahavir, the founder of Jainism. And he also included it was wrong to eat animals. He believed in metempsychosis, that we're reborn as other things. But whether he was influenced by India or not has been called one of the great unsolved mysteries of world religions. And some people even claim he visited India, but this hasn't been proven. And even until the 19th century, European vegetarians sometimes called themselves Pythagoreans. It's interesting that vegetarianism became very much a part of the Christian ethos. Some theologians in ancient times looked upon ancient India as maybe possibly the Garden of Eden, and some early fathers of the church advocated a vegetarian diet, and they looked at the spiritual benefits that Indians had. Now, this was later declared a heresy, and even today you'll find some people, well, they base this on the biblical text that in Genesis it says that after the Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden, that God gave man dominion. The Garden of Eden was vegetarian, by the way. God gave man dominion over all beasts and things that swam and crawled, meaning that they could eat them. So some people take this as that you should eat meat. But there were vegetarian Christian sects, such as the Cathars, and they were persecuted by the Inquisition, and so on. And in Europe in the 18th century, there was actually earlier, 16th, 17th century, people like Marco Polo and Leonardo da Vinci were really fascinated by the vegetarians. And Leonardo da Vinci was a vegetarian, and some people even claim he visited India, but again, that hasn't been proven. There was a great advocate of Hindu vegetarianism by a guy named Thomas Tryon. And there were a lot of, especially in the UK, there was a lot of advocation of vegetarian on moral grounds, on health grounds, and on environmental grounds as well. There was a lot, that was a very interesting facet. In the 18th century, you had a deism, which was skepticism about the tenets of Christianity. And this led to a popularity of vegetarianism among European intellectuals like Rousseau, Voltaire, Shelley, and others. In 1843, the first vegetarian society was established in Britain. Its founder was a guy named, not his founder, but one of the advocates was Henry Salt, who wrote 40 books advocating animal rights and vegetarianism. And when Mahatma Gandhi visited England, he at first had trouble being a vegetarian. Then he discovered the Vegetarian Society, and he became a great advocate of it, and he became a member of the ruling council. And here you can see a picture of him with the London Vegetarian Society, and he linked it to his own philosophy of ahimsa. So that's vegetarianism. And now I'm going to look at another part of the world, which also adopted Indian food, but for very different reasons. In 1834, the British declared slavery illegal in their empire. Now, as I mentioned, the sugar plantations had been worked by African slaves, and after they were freed, they didn't want to do this anymore. It was very hard work. Now, this economic consequences could have been devastated, and many of these plantation owners were very well connected in Britain. They had, I think the Prime Minister's son-in-law was one of the owners. So the East India Company came to the rescue by recruiting workers from the poorer parts of India. And these came to be called indentured laborers. And what they did is they signed contracts agreeing to work on a particular sugar estate for 2 terms of 5 years each, at the end of which the owner would either pay the owner of the estate would pay for them to go back to India, or they could stay on and buy land. Now, around 90% of the workers came from Bihar and Eastern UP, because this was a very poor area. It had been struck with famine, and a few came from South India. They cut across all religions. A lot of them, interestingly, were women, single women, and many of these may have been widowed. They may have been trying to escape from unpleasant mothers-in-law. We really don't know, but this was an interesting phenomenon. And most of them would be recruited by agents, and they, of course, would tell them all kinds of fantastic stories about what life was like. And Trinidad, they thought that meant Trinidad, the land of sugar. And they would leave via Calcutta. And even today, some of these people, if you ask them where their ancestors come, because I've been to Trinidad several times, they say all they know is that from Calcutta, because that's what the ship would list, the ship that they came over on would list. So between 1834 and 1917, when this system was abolished, 1.4 million Indians left the subcontinent, including 240,000 went to Guyana, 144,000 to Trinidad, and 37,000 to Jamaica. Some went to the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, because the British had acquired that from the French in 1810. So now you have a French-speaking country where much of the population is from Indian origin, and others went to Fiji. Later, they supplied workers to Malaysia, to the workers for the coffee and rubber plantations. So around 2 million Indians went to Malaysia, another 2.5 million went to Burma, and most of these were from South India. And later, a lot of Indians went to South Africa, both to work there and to help build the railway into the interiors. And others went as teachers, administrators, and attorneys, including Mahatma Gandhi. So wherever these workers went, they took their food habits with them. And in the process, they created some new hybrid cuisines. In Trinidad and Tobago, about 40% of the population are of Indian origin. And the novelist V.P. Naipaul, who was born in Trinidad, wrote that here the indentured Indians managed to recreate an eastern Uttar Pradesh village in central India, as if it were the vastness of, in central Trinidad, as if in the vastness of India. Now, curry is a common main course. And the main spices, cumin, coriander, and fenugreek and turmeric, are like those used in a typical Bihari household. Usually they use ready-made curry powders. There's 2 brands that are very popular, especially people don't, if they're preparing, they do distinguish between Trinidadian and Indian food. And people, especially middle-class housewives, will sometimes prepare meals and they will use ready ground spices. But most people use these ready-made curry powders. And they're typically served with rotis, which is like parathas, and a dish called bake, which is actually a fried bread. Now in Trinidad, the word roti has another meaning. It also is a very popular street food that has been called the country's national dish. Basically, it's a large wheat bread, and they coat it with ground yellow peas, And then it's wrapped around a meat, fish, or vegetable curry. It's enclosed in wrap paper or foil, and it's eaten on the move, as you can see on the left. And it's a very big dish, and it's really something that you eat walking around. And another popular dish is something called doubles. And this is a sandwich composed of 2 pieces of turmeric flavored fried roti. It's filled with curried chickpeas, topped with spiced chutneys and chili sauce, and it resembles the Indian snack chole bhature. And there's also a lot of snacks and sweets that you buy that are really very similar to Bihari sweets. I found an old book written by a 19th century collector who in Bihar who describes some of the things that are eaten there, and they're things that you find in Trinidad today. So it's very interesting that they took these with them. Okay, I just mentioned briefly that in Malaysia and Singapore, the workers are mainly Tamils, and you find that they serve their dishes, sambars, rasams, idli dosas, in so-called banana leaf restaurants. And a very popular breakfast dish is laksha, which is a very hot chili-infused coconut milk broth with noodles, fish paste, shredded curry, and other dishes. And it's kind of a hybrid Malaysia, Singapore, Indian dish. So let me go to South Africa and Germany, because these are countries that have kind of very interesting dishes. So South Africa has a large population of South Indian origin, especially in Durban, and I think many of them are of a South Indian origin. And a dish called curry or curries is popular everywhere. And they are flavored with freshly ground spices or a Malay-style curry powder. And they often include fruit. But the most famous dish is something called bunny chow. And this has been called South Africa's national dish. And there's actually a movie called Bunny Chow that I've seen that features a bunch of young people who want to be comedians. And this food kind of reflects all the different strands that go into South Africa. And what it is, it's a meat curry served in a hollow out loaf of Western style bread. And you can find this everywhere in Durban. And one explanation of its name is that Indian merchants were called banyas. And they opened small restaurants. And Blacks could not enter because of apartheid, but they could illegally be served at the black door. So one restaurant owner got the idea of hollowing out a small loaf of bread, filling it with curry, topping it with Indian pickles, and then handing it over to the customer. So it would be something would be wrapped in paper, and you could eat this on the spot. And the dish's name comes from banya chow. Now, another dish that is kind of very unlikely is in Germany is something called Currywurst. And it's one of Germany's most popular street food. It's a pork sausage roasted on skewers with onion and green pepper. And it's cut into bite-sized pieces and topped with curry powder and then tomato ketchup. And it sounds rather gruesome, but I think I had it once. And it's often served with French fries as well. And almost 1 billion of these currywursts are served in Germany every year. Now, one explanation, and there's a lot of debate about who invented it. There's been a film made about this. There's competing plaques about the spot that it was invented, because it's really an important dish in Germany. But one explanation is that a British soldier in occupied Britain asked for a curry. One woman served him a sausage sprinkled with curry powder, and this was the origin of currywurst. Now, you wouldn't expect curry to be found in Japan and Korea, because these really were never part of the British Empire. They didn't have many ties, but nonetheless, curry is one of the most popular dishes in Japan, especially as a home-cooked meal. Years ago, my husband had a Japanese student, and he invited us, he said he'd invite us to his home. He was going to prepare real Japanese food. So we were really excited. So we went and he served us a curry. And my husband said, well, you know, curry was invented in India. He said, no, it's a real Japanese dish. So that was my first introduction to Japanese curry. But, and it's a very unusual dish because it's, what it is, it's chunks of meat, carrots, onions, and potatoes. And it's served in kind of a ochre colored curry powdered flavor, slightly sweetish sauce. And it's made with a ready-made block of curry sauce called roux. So you cook the vegetables and meat, and then you add this to it and you serve it. And you serve it over rice. And it's really, we always think of Japanese food as being very elegant and aesthetic. And this is the opposite. It's not a very attractive dish. And obviously it satisfies some need that Japanese have for something that is spicy and that is very hearty and filling. And there's different levels. It can be very mild, or it can be quite spicy. And one variety is called Vermont curry powder. It has apples in it. It's really, you wouldn't typically find it in restaurants, although there are a few that serve it. It's something that school children love and your mother would make for you at home. Now, in the mid-19th century, how did this become popular? That's the question. Japanese ports were open to foreigners, and the Japanese saw that officers in the British Navy had a curry day once a month. Now, at that time, the Japanese government wanted to encourage Japanese to eat more meat. Many were Buddhists and didn't eat meat, and they wanted to encourage meat consumption as a way of building strength. So they found curry with rice as an ideal way of doing it. And the first recipe for curry in Japan was published in 1872. Now, today, the curry tradition is carried on by the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, which is really the Japanese Navy. Their ships serve curry every Friday, and each ship prides itself in having its own curry recipe. And they often feature unusual ingredients such as coffee, chocolate, or cheese, or ketchup. And there's even been a cookbook listing all 48 of these recipes of the Japanese Navy curry. Unfortunately, it's in Japanese, so I haven't been able to get a copy, but I've seen parts of it online. Now, Koreans, of course, were under Japanese occupation for a long time, and many were forced to live there in World War II. And they also adopted curry, and a company called Otogi first produced its first ready-to-eat curry in the 1940s. And today, this company, this Otogi curry powder, has over 1,000 products, including Australia instant curry, a 3-minute line of curry, and it has 5 levels of different spiciness. Now, Koreans love very spicy food, so they can have very spicy curries indeed. So I think it's very interesting that, and again, people probably don't even associate it with Indian anymore. It's become so much a part of the cuisine. So finally, I'd like just to talk about North America. Immigration laws in the US, Canada, and Australia changed in the 1960s to end regional preferences which favored Europe, and to encourage immigration based on professional skills and family unification. So today there's an estimated 6.3 million people of South Asian origin in the United States. And of course, as of yesterday, we have a new vice president who's of South Asian origin. Everybody's very proud of that. Nearly 2 million in Canada, where I think there's at least 4 cabinet ministers of South Asian origin, and 850,000 in Australia. And as these people came, shopping districts arose to meet their needs. And Jackson Heights in Queens, and in Chicago Avenue, there's a street called Devon Avenue, which is a few blocks from where I live, and it's very famous because at one time there were 150 Indian stores on Devon Avenue. One of the most famous is Patel Brothers, that opened a little store near our house. Now the Patel Brothers are mega rich. They own 50 stores around the world. They have their own line of products, and it all started here in Chicago. And what's happened though, as Indians become more affluent, they move to the suburbs. And so now Devon Avenue is really diminishing, but you're finding shopping malls in Indian affluent suburbs of Chicago, grocery stores, jewelry stores, and all that. So, so this is kind of a major change. Talking about Indian restaurants in, oh, and I should add that you can buy Indian ingredients pretty much in every supermarket now. They have ready-made frozen breads, they have pickles, so in the international aisle. So it's much easier to buy Indian food. When we came to Chicago in the late 60s, there was nowhere you could buy it. It was just very difficult. People used to smuggle things in from India. Now, there were Indian restaurants in New York in the 1920s, the scene really expanded in the 1960s. And in most cases, these restaurants featured dishes like those that you had in India. The Punjabi owned restaurants that opened in New Delhi, like Gaylord's. Most featured North Indian dishes like tandoori chicken with naan, butter chicken, samosas, saag paneer. And these are still very popular. Usually, I know when I go to an Indian restaurant, I notice that most non-Indians, this is what they order. And then you have some South Indian vegetarian restaurants like Woodlands and Mysore that have opened. And you have, in Chicago at least, you have a few dishes serving regional food. We have a few restaurants serving Gujarati thalis, which are very good. We have quite a few Hyderabadi restaurants called dhabas, which serve taxi drivers. And they're very nice, they're very good. The food is plain, but it's very authentic. And but apart from that, I mean, in Chicago, we have no Bengali restaurants, we have no Kashmiri restaurants, we have no Kerala restaurants. So the repertoire is pretty limited, and it's unfortunate because, really, as I was saying at the beginning, that there really isn't such a thing as Indian food. I mean, it's like saying European food. It's even more diverse. You have such regional diversity. You have 8 religions with their own food habits. So it's really hard to pin down what Indian food is. And I think that is a barrier to its larger acceptance here. And Indian food has never really caught on here to the degree that Italian, Chinese, Thai, or Japanese have. And Professor Krishan Ray of NYU studied this, and he says there's really no standard repertoire because Indian food is so diverse. Cooks don't like to prepare dishes outside their capability. And also, more Americans aren't as familiar with Indian food as the British are. Britons have a long tradition of dealing with India, a long tradition of eating Indian food, and India is still fairly remote to Americans. Although maybe with our new vice president, and who is a great cook, by the way, she's given cooking demos, so maybe that will encourage people to explore Indian food a little bit more. And also, Thai food is quite popular here, and Korean food, and I think people who like spicy foods may tend to want to go there. Although I keep telling people Indian food isn't spicy. I mean, it's this myth that it's somehow burning hot, which I think also discourages people from eating it. Now, just to conclude, in the 1980s, a new kind of restaurant started opening. I think this started in Britain, in London, and they have more sophisticated menus. And what I think you're finding is a more globalization of cuisine. And you have Indian chefs who study at the Culinary Institute of America. You have chefs that studied in Spain. That's like our local chef. He did 2 years at Noma, which was the best restaurant in the world. You have American chefs go to the top restaurants in India, like in Bombay, like Mask, like India. You have Indian Accent, which now has a branch in Delhi. And this food is really quite different. And these are from our first taste of this, which is Roo, which also has a branch in Delhi. And you can see the presentation of the dishes is very elegant. It's not fusion food. Fusion is a word that one doesn't use anymore. It kind of implies a very hastily combination. This is a very food that reflects international techniques. You have a paneer pinwheel, and you can see he's pouring the sauce in a very elegant little jar. You have a beef short rib curry, which is prepared with a kind of a potato, sort of like a Yorkshire pudding. You have a green pea and goat cheese kulcha. And this kind of food, and this restaurant's become very popular. Unfortunately, because of COVID, all restaurants in Chicago are closed to indoor dining, but we can do takeout. And so we've been doing takeout from this and other restaurants. And a couple of other restaurants have opened. So I'm really hoping that this kind of food will be popular. It's very expensive, of course, but not very expensive, it's expensive. But the people will begin to understand Indian cuisine and will explore it more, because it really is one of the world's great cuisines. And as I've tried to show, Indian food has had a great influence around the world, and there's no part of the globe that really has been untouched by it. So thank you very much, Eshan, for inviting me. I hope that this was kind of interesting, and I'd be very happy, to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sen, for this lovely lecture. And as we all know, Indians have an enduring relationship with food, and we can talk about food for hours. Then, and we still want a refill for chola and bhatura. So, my first question is obviously uh, that you mentioned that we cannot categorize Indian food in one category, and because there's so much diversity. And even in food in India, there's Dalit food, there's food for the gods that is served in the temples of India. There's food for the general public, like the upper caste food. How do you see that in the world cuisine today? Do you see that only the elite food is being served, or because there's this Dalit food called the haldiya dal, which is there in India, but there's no representation in the world as such. So do you think this categorization?
Well, certainly temple food's very interesting because here in America, the Indian temples have really nice kitchens. They bring chefs from India, and they serve usually very good South Indian food. So that kind of food at least is available here. I don't know, in India, I mean, are there restaurants that serve Dalit food in India? I don't know. No. So I think this will come. I think there's so much more interest in food history in India now. It's just amazing. People are really, looking into different cuisines. They're looking into its history. I think someone has written a book on Dalit food, and I find this just really exciting that this is happening in India. And I think people will be able to explore more and more of what other people in other parts of India enjoy.
I think we have a question from Chinmaya Arjun Raja, and his question is that how did Indian style pickles become famous in the West, especially England, compared to the Western and Italian style sauticity pickles and the gherkins, etc., which are very different from the Indian style pickles. Uh, he's an artisanal pickle maker with his own homemade artisanal brand of pickles. So he wanted your views on the same.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, better. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, how did Indian style pickles become famous in the West, especially England, compared to the Western and Italian style pickles, which are very different from the Indian style?
Oh, well, I mean, in India, I mean, in England, of course, pickles were introduced very, in the 19th century, and then you have this company. I've forgotten the name that is great producer of Indian pickles. The name will come to me. I don't know if they're very popular here. Mm, I think probably not. I mean, chutney, people will have chutney quite a bit, but more than Major Gray's styles chutney. And sometimes they'll serve it as a side to something. But I think that, I think England would be more of a market than probably America.
Yeah. So the next question is from Nandini Datta, and her question is the culinary experience essentially a mind experience? For example, retailing a recipe by remembering taste, grandmother flavors, etc., may actually change authenticity. There may be a conflict between the what is tasty and what is authentic. What's your take on that?
Oh, that is a very difficult question. It's certainly true that the foods we enjoy in childhood um, really resonate with us. I mean, we all like what the way my mother made certain dishes. If I have it somewhere else, I'll say, well, this is okay, but it's not what it should be. I'm sure everybody feels that. If you haven't any experience with a culinary tradition, then of course you go to it with a totally open mind or open mouth. I mean, I have no background in Indian food, so uh, I will like or dislike things on the basis of taste. Whereas my husband, if he has a certain dish, um, he will have a different attitude towards it. I mean, it won't have the same, it won't have the emotional impact. I suppose if you don't grow up with a culinary tradition, it really doesn't have an emotional impact on you to the same degree as it does if you have. I mean, this is the basis of Marcel Proust's famous Remembrance of Things Past, that he eats this this cookie, and it brings back a whole flood of memories, and I think that's probably true.
Yeah, so Sanjukta Ghosh asks that why do you think curry is Britain's national dish?
That's a good question. I think probably one reason, maybe, I haven't seen this, is that in the 50s, Britain was very economically depressed. It was really in a bad way after the war. And these curry places opened, and they were pretty inexpensive. And so probably there wasn't that much fast food. You didn't have McDonald's and things. So this was probably a very easy way of eating out and eating takeout. So I think it probably caught on that way. And there were restaurants all over the place because these immigrants opened them. So probably it was just that it was very available. Well, now, of course, there's a lot of competition, but still people enjoy curry. And, if you watch British TV shows, you see them eating curry. So I think it's just become part of the culture now, part of the cuisine. And of course, there's a lot of jokes about it. There's this among young guys who go out drinking, they would drink as hot a curry as possible. And that was to show their manhood. So there was a skit in British TV that these South Asian guys in Britain go out, and they go they go to an English restaurant, and they try to see who can order the blandest food possible. And there's a competition for that. It was quite funny. I'll see if I can find the clip and send it to you, because it was kind of making fun of English food, really.
Yeah, so the next question is quite a long question. It's from Lauren Michael, and his question are there are several major obstacles to home cooking of Indian food overseas. One is access to ingredients, but the other is cooking technique. Even cooking shows cannot bridge the knowledge of technique. Can you please tell us about Indian cooking classes overseas, and how to master the techniques?
This is something a question that's very near to me. I think one reason Indian food at home isn't popular is because the recipes are so complicated. I mean, if we make a dal at home in a hurry for lunch, we do not use 10 spices. We basically cook it. We cook masur dal. We cook maybe a ready-made panch phoron, or maybe a little, cumin seed, and put it in. It's very easy. These books go into such detail. You look at a recipe, who's going to have all those spices unless you cook that cuisine? I think and the other day I read an article. It was about making I think it was making a kind of dal where you mash it. Now, if I mash dal, I just use a potato masher. This recipe, the writer, and this was the New York Times, said you need to have a special utensil, which I had never heard of, to do this. So they make it unduly complicated. A really good, simple cookbook was Veeraswamy's Indian Cookery, which was published, I think, in the 50s. There was no Veeraswamy, it's totally fictional. But when my husband and I started cooking Indian food in the 60s, there wasn't that many books. We had two books. One was Mrs. Balbir Singh's, which I think is the best Indian cookbook still ever written, and Mother Jaffrey agrees. This is a real serious book. It's not the kind a beginner. And the other was this Veeraswamy Indian Cookery, and it was very simple. It had recipes with a few ingredients. You put it together, and we would use that for cooking because we didn't have anything else. So I don't think it needs to be complicated. I think it's been made complicated. Indian cooking the same way. I mean, you don't need a lot of spices. You can use ready-made spice mixes. Everyone says, oh, curry powder. No one uses it. Well, we use curry powder. My husband, who's a great cook, uses it in certain dishes. We use ready-made garam masala. I mean, if you're cooking for yourself every day, you don't have a cook. In the old days, a joint household, the mother would have daughter-in-laws who would do different things. It doesn't exist anymore. So, I mean, it doesn't need to be so complicated, and I wish it hadn't been made so.
Yes. And there are a couple of YouTube channels that are emerging today, and they're showing how to make Indian food. So Lauren can check that out as well. There's this question from Dr. Shailendra Manja. He's a teacher at Delhi University, and his question is: we find impact of Ayurveda or herbal on Indian food habits. Do you find any similarity anywhere else and in any other cuisine?
Well, there's so much misconceptions about Ayurveda. When I wrote my book, I looked at the original Ayurvedic text. I looked at Charak Samhita, which was translated, and other texts. And if you look at it, it's not vegetarian. It's all kinds of recipes for meat broth, and somehow the people get the gunas and the doshas all mixed up. They talk about sattvic and so on, and which really is a different tradition. So what passes as Ayurvedic today? It's not. If you go back to the original text, I mean, it's which is, and there's even alcohol in my book. I even have a list of pairings of food and drinks that go with it. So they were very open-minded about what kind of foods you could eat. So as far as Ayurveda goes, I don't know. I mean, restaurants kind of like the Rue had Ayurvedic cocktails. They had different, which I don't know, but to kind of show its health-giving properties. So I think I really don't know what impact it's had. I mean, I know restaurants use it, people use it, they say it's healthy, but and I don't know whether that exists in other cultures as well, whether there's a similar tradition of well, there is probably. There's hot and cold. People believe that in India, in the Middle East, and things like that. But I think that's, I could go on and on, but that's my view on that subject.
Yeah, so the next question is from Arusha Mansoori, and I think that will be the last question for the evening. And if anybody have any other question, please do send it as soon as possible. So this question is, do you have any observations or comments about how food prepared in middle class Indian homes is getting more westernized? For example, serving pasta or rich curries or having a highly westernized table setting is something to aspire to in today's middle class.
That's a good question. I don't think I really have enough familiarity with it. I mean, I know what my husband's family, who were very middle class and very very westernized actually. I mean, I know and this was in the 60s and 70s. They would certainly eat at the table, and they would have Western dishes. At Christmas, we always had a roast chicken, and but that's really my only experience. So I think maybe you could answer that question more than I. I don't know how food habits are changing in most families.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I think there's a shift because as I think we are in the we are in the era of globalization, so naturally there is a shift in Indian middle class families. But there are families that are taking their traditions very seriously even today. So thank you so much, Dr. Sain, for for taking out your time for delivering this wonderful and very delicious, if I can say, lecture this evening. And it was totally an honor for me to host you, to be in a conversation with you, because
Oh.
you are an inspiration, you are an icon, in the field of culinary history. And it was a good fortune of Carvan to host you this evening and in morning for you.
Well, thank you, and I hope everyone will go now and enjoy a delicious dinner. So I've kept you from your dinner. I'm sorry about that.
No, thank you so much, ma'am, and it was
Okay.
truly an honor.
Well, it was fun. Thank you.